If Nick Caserio is still shopping for a wide receiver, why couldn't we help him out a little bit and put together a list? Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans, and let's talk about the pursuit of a wide receiver by the Houston Texans. Obviously, they come up short on Chargers wide receiver Keenan Allen. He's headed to the Chicago Bears. The Texans offered a third-round pick in next year's draft, according to reports, as well as a pick swap in this year's draft. The Chargers opted for the fourth-round pick that was higher than the Texans' two fourth-round picks in this year's draft, and Keenan Allen is a member of the Chicago Bears now. So as we start to put together this list, let's put some parameters together on exactly what type of wide receiver, the cost, and things like that. We talked about the compensation the Texans were willing to send for Keenan Allen. So they were willing to send a future third-round pick, and perhaps they were willing to send one of those fourth-round picks in this year's draft, but obviously the Bears' fourth-round pick checks in well ahead of the Texans' fourth-round pick. So that's kind of the price of the wide receiver. If the Texans are indeed going to trade for a wide receiver, let's keep that price in mind or lower as we start to put this list together. So while I would love to think about the Texans trading for, say, Jalen Waddle's not going to be traded for a future third-round pick or a fourth-round pick in this year's draft. Jalen Waddle would command so much more in a trade. So as much as I'd like to see the Penguin out there on NRG Stadium's turf scoring touchdowns, that's not happening within the parameters of this list that we're putting together. In addition to that, this needs to be a team that probably is not expected to win a whole bunch of games in 2024. It doesn't have to be that team, but teams that are rebuilding or in a little bit of football purgatory, they would be more likely to unload some of their players than teams that are really close to winning or that are trying to desperately win. So, hey, the Philadelphia Eagles, Devontae Smith, they're trying desperately to win. They're not unloading Devontae Smith. So keep that in mind as we put the list together as well. I've got three names for you that the Texans could trade for that fit the parameters of this list. So we're putting together a little shopping list for Nick Caserio. I'll start with the least impressive name, the name that I am not as comfortable being a member of the Houston Texans and maybe doesn't move the needle at all, to a name that moves the needle a whole lot more than I expected it to, as I started doing my little research and thinking about this. The first name is Juju Smith-Schuster from the New England Patriots. Smith-Schuster is still on the Patriots, and they've done a good job, the Patriots have, of adding at least some options at the wide receiver spot. And if they trade down out of their pick, and heck, even if they stay put, they could be adding a wide receiver. So when you start thinking about Smith-Schuster's role with the team and what's going on with him, it seems like he may be the odd man out when it is all said and done. Now, he's set to be 28 years old this upcoming season, and he was awful for the New England Patriots. He had just 260 total yards in 11 games before injuries, which plagued him all year, ended his season. But a couple of years ago for the Kansas City Chiefs, he played in 16 games, had over 100 targets, and finished with 933 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, again, that's not some sort of spectacular amount of production from a couple of years ago, and it dropped when he played on a much worse team. But the Texans this upcoming season are going to be way better than this Patriots team that Smith-Schuster just played on. He's got inside-outside versatility to his game as well, and he's been on some productive football teams before. He fits in as sort of a piece that you can move around. You don't have to put him on the field all the time. But Juju Smith-Schuster's the first name, and he costs a whole heck of a lot less than Keenan Allen. In fact, if you like the idea of Juju Smith-Schuster on the Texans may not even have to trade for him. He could get cut here in the next couple of weeks, or certainly before training camp gets started, and the Texans could add him that way. Might take a little bit longer from a planning standpoint to get him in here, but Juju Smith-Schuster was the first name that kind of fit the parameters that I put together. It's not super exciting, but it's also not super expensive if you wanted to bring him in, and that really wouldn't solve anything for me for the wide receiver room. I'd still hope that the Houston Texans spend a draft pick on the wide receiver spot. It wouldn't guarantee that Smith-Schuster's on this team either. So that's something to pay attention to. The next name that popped up for me, Darius Slayton. He plays for the New York Football Giants, will be 27 this upcoming season, coming off of a season where he had 770 yards and 4 touchdowns receiving for the Giants. And again, a little inside-outside versatility. And he's never been a super productive player. He's had a bunch of 700-yard seasons with a 339-yard season mixed in there. His best year in the NFL was actually his first year in the NFL. He went for 740 and 8 touchdowns. And he's been just a middling player for most of his time in the National Football League. But quantity over quality would be the approach with Darius Slayton. And again, not super expensive. In fact, way less expensive than what Keenan Allen ended up going for. A 4th-round pick, perhaps, maybe a 6th-round pick, a future pick in the latter rounds could find you with Darius Slayton. And the Giants aren't expected to go anywhere. Again, not necessarily a player that really excites you, would keep you from drafting a wide receiver, feeling like you've really solved some things at the wide receiver spot, but at least an option, an idea for the Texans to think about. And again, not super exciting, but it's a name. The next name actually has a little bit of excitement to him. The next name actually has a lot of production in his NFL career, and that name is Courtland Sutton from the Denver Broncos. Sutton, I know, is a name that's popped up a bunch in the comment section here on YouTube. People on social media have talked about him, and the Broncos are in sell mode. Heck, you could trade for their washing machines in their facility right now if you wanted to. They are willing to trade anything that's not bolted down there in Denver, and Sutton is certainly a name that can be intriguing. The contract makes it so that the Broncos would save a couple of bucks, and they've dealt with some issues financially this offseason, and will deal with some issues financially with the commitment to Russell Wilson's contract. And then Sutton's departure, look, the Broncos aren't supposed to be good this year. They could get somebody in there, maybe draft another player at the wide receiver spot that could take a lot of Sutton's reps. They need to get younger right away. They don't need to be worrying about a guy like Sutton helping out a young quarterback that they're going to go chase. They've got to get younger with that quarterback, and Sutton, I don't know, totally fits into the timeline. But of course, if you want to make the argument, you need to have that type of guy there to go and help that young quarterback develop. I certainly understand their desire to keep Sutton. They already traded Jerry Jeudy this offseason, and Sutton, he'd be a little bit more expensive than those next two guys that I talked to because he's still a pretty productive player. About 90 targets, 59 receptions this past season, 10 touchdowns. So he's a threat there in the red zone and shortly out of the red zone. 772 yards, so not a 1,000-yard receiver, really, but again, a productive guy. Doesn't have as much versatility as we've talked about with some of these wide receivers. Doesn't have as many snaps at the slot as you would hope for some of the versatility conversation that it feels like the Texans have emphasized with their wide receivers. Nico Collins, inside, outside. Noah Brown, inside, outside. Tank Dell, inside, outside. You get the point. Not as much inside, outside with Courtland Sutton, but hey, stick him out there on the outside, figure out the other 2 or 3 wide receivers on the field, and let Sutton go to work down the sideline with a big body and a big target for C.J. Stroud to go and find. It certainly is intriguing. Do I feel great about sending the 4th-round pick for him or one of the 4th-round picks for him? I don't feel great about it, but it's worth noting he is under contract for an additional year, so that would kind of be 3 of your wide receiver spots for the next 2 seasons. You know, Nico Collins, who I would think is either going to get a contract extension or get the franchise tag at the end of next season. Tank Dell would obviously be under contract, and then Courtland Sutton would be under contract, and then you could kind of fill out the rest of the wide receiver room however you see fit. But again, not a player or a name that just absolutely blows me away, and I feel like the Texans have to go get that guy. So that leads me to really where this conversation is in light of somebody being available that we don't believe is actually available, I don't want the Texans to trade for a wide receiver. I want them to draft a wide receiver. And I've got 3 names for you right off the bat that the Texans ought to think about drafting when it comes draft time. And, of course, they've got 3 picks on the second day of the draft, including 2 selections in the second round after their trade last week with the Minnesota Vikings. Player number 1, Roman Wilson from Michigan. He kicked tail at the Senior Bowl. He was fantastic at the Senior Bowl and carried it over to a really good combine workout. A lot of versatility to Wilson's game. Can play inside, can play outside. We've talked about how important that versatility is to the Houston Texans. The next name, Ladd McConkey from Georgia. The Georgia Bulldog is fantastic. Tested off the charts at the scouting combine and then added to it in his pro day with some of the impressive drills that he had at his pro day. And these pro day numbers, when I tell you they're impressive, you're thinking, well, Cody, it's just the Georgia scouts with their cool stopwatches helping out their guy. No, these are scouts from NFL teams that report it to Dane Brugler, who then talks about it on social media. So I trust the numbers. Again, McConkey, a guy that's inside, outside, and people are going to think about him like they thought about Tank Dell last year. They're going to think he's slight. They don't care how athletic he is. And then with McConkey, they're going to see that he's Caucasian and think that he can only play in the slot. McConkey is a do-it-all type of wide receiver. And the last name, Xavier Legette. Again, not as much slot wide receiver, but still some. It's probably a 3/4 of the snaps split to the outside for Xavier Legette, but he still can get in there on the inside. And when you start thinking about a guy that evokes Deebo Samuel comparisons, well, then you start to think, okay, Xavier Legette, you could do a little bit of everything with him. So again, we went through the list of veterans the Texans could trade for. It doesn't knock my socks off. If it knocks your socks off, let me know that your socks are off in the comments section. Actually, don't say that. I don't want any sort of weird foot stuff in the comment section. But if you do like one of those veterans, let me know which one in the comment section. If you prefer the wide receivers in the draft, certainly put that in the comment section as well. And on your way down there, throw me a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I appreciate you watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. And I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.